Like if you've ever looked at anybody who's ever been to college or went to college, you understand when you see your bill.
That's why college is a scam. The entire education system is designed to breed you into an employee.
And university today is the biggest scam and waste of time ever.
You were told that if you didn't go to college, you would never amount to anything. Then you get to college and you're taking these classes because you were told you had to go here anyway,
right.
But you don't really know what you want to do and don't know who you are.
I've seen so many videos like this lately. There are a lot of videos out there either saying college is a scam or a waste of time or something to just take your money. Those criticisms have come up more than I can count in my career. As a college counselor, it breaks my heart to see just how many people have lost faith in the higher education system. However, on the other hand, I feel like those people might be onto something. But before we get into that, welcome to my channel. My name is Mr. Suero. You can call me Mr. S. If you're new here, I'm a trained college counselor with a degree in history. And on this channel, we combine the two to try to help to demystify the higher education system. So if videos like that are your cup of tea, make sure to subscribe for future videos. Now, we have a lot to talk about, so let's get into it. I remember people telling me in high school that college is an investment in your future, and it absolutely is. But what happens when that investment becomes too expensive to justify? As you saw from the previous videos, a lot of people see higher education as something to just be sold to them. My generation and younger have seen the cost of college continuously rise each and every year to the point that it's almost unattainable now. And I can't help but shake the feeling that some of these institutions are trying to justify that cost simply by making college feel more like a commodity rather than a public good. Unfortunately, we're in the age where the commodification of just about everything is beginning to take hold. Culture, labor, even our identities. Higher education is only the latest. So what does the term commodification actually mean? According to Webster, to commodify it means to turn something such as an intrinsic value or a work of art, or in this case, higher education, into a commodity, something to be bought and sold, giving something that already has its own value a new monetary value. Higher education itself didn't drastically change over the century, but how it's valued and delivered did. But in order to understand where we are, we need to understand where we've been. College in the US wasn't even seen as a pathway to opportunity. It was seen as a status indicator, and only the wealthy and well-connected could afford to go. The working class couldn't afford to attend unless someone paid for them. Colleges were small, religious, and designed to educate future ministers, lawyers, and political leaders. If you weren't a wealthy white male, college simply wasn't even part of the conversation. This remained unchanged in the United States for over a century, and it wasn't until the American Civil War that we began to see a shift. Passed by Congress and signed by President Lincoln in 1862, the first Morrill Act marked a major turning point in higher education. I went a bit more into detail on the Morrill Acts in my other video about HBCUs. I'll leave a link to that in the description box down below. Essentially, the federal government gave land to states to create universities focused on important career paths that each state needed. Once a state accepted a land grant, around 30,000 acres per Congress member of that state, it also accepted responsibility for maintaining that institution. They treated these institutions much like public infrastructure, such as roads and courts. A completely different logic than what we have today. The purpose of the Morrill system was to educate the masses. In other words, people who couldn't afford elite private colleges. I want to state some important but often overlooked facts. Although college became more accessible, it was still very unequal. Minorities were often excluded from this new effort to educate. Mexican Americans and African Americans were often pushed into separate schools with fewer resources. Segregation kept many of them out of publicly created colleges and universities, and almost all of the land given to these states to create these colleges once belonged to Native Americans, obtained either through coerced one-sided treaties and land seizures, or quite often violence to remove them. Even my beloved alma mater, Bowie State University, stands on former Piscataway Nation land, as many other institutions in my area do. Native Americans were forced to aid in the creation of the public higher education system we have through land taken from them. And I want to make sure this is spoken about, because oftentimes in higher education and history, we gloss over those whose voices were historically silenced. And that's important to acknowledge in order to better the systems that we already have in place. Okay, where were we? Oh yeah. The next change in higher education wouldn't come for another 50 years after the second Morrill Act in 1890. In 1944, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the Servicemen's Readjustment Act, better known as the GI Bill. This was one of the most significant pieces of legislation in U.S. history. Amongst other benefits for veterans in the bill, it offered returning soldiers, Marines, sailors, and later airmen federal support for tuition, books, supplies, counseling, and even living expenses to pursue college or vocational training. With the U.S. economy still healing from the Great Depression, the law was designed in part to prevent post-war recession by keeping millions of veterans out of the unemployment lines in education and training programs. Within a decade, millions of veterans used these benefits, with more than 2.2 million attending college by 1956, and leading to overall degree awarding to double between 1940 and 1950. And during this time, state governments were quietly expanding and subsidizing public universities. Historians often refer to this period as the golden age of public higher education. Enrollment soared, state investments were robust, and tuition remained low enough that college was no longer just for the privileged few. It was a societal benefit for all. Now that's all well and good, but what you're probably wondering is where this train went off the rails. Turning higher education into a commodity didn't just happen overnight. Essentially, it began in the 1970s, accelerated in the 80s, and became dominant by the 90s. And there are four main reasons as to why this happened. State funding per student steadily declined. Neoliberal economic policies began to take root. The federal student loan program gave a green light to colleges to continue to raise the cost of tuition. And competition beat out cooperation at many of these schools. The US economy experienced several downturns in the 1970s and 80s, which put pressure on state budgets. As a result, higher education budgets were often cut or held flat when compared to inflation and enrollment growth. In addition to shifting budgets, neoliberal policies began to take root in American politics. As a result, higher education was reframed from a public responsibility into a private investment. The dominant message became, college pays off if you choose wisely. Moreover, the expansion of the federal student loan program changed how colleges were financed. This allowed colleges to raise tuition with less resistance, knowing students could still finance the increase in tuition by going into debt, a topic we'll tackle a bit later. And the last reason? Universities no longer saw themselves as part of a shared public system. This transformed the university and college landscape into survival of the fittest. Prestige, ranking, and tuition dollars became the goal of many institutions. Rankings, particularly US News and World Report, began shaping institution behavior by ranking colleges and universities. Institutions realized these rankings directly led to students applying and attending, or completely avoiding the school like the plague. Education became less about who was served, and more about who looked good on paper. Instead of a public service, college began to change back to its pre-17th century roots, relying on the individual to pay their own way. But despite all this, commodification isn't an inevitable ending to higher education. There are institutions and movements pushing back. Community colleges, tuition-free models, HBCUs, tribal colleges, and state and federal policy efforts focused on reinvestment. These all remind us that higher education can still serve the public good, if and only if we choose to fund and value it that way. So when people ask why college feels like something being sold to them, they're asking the right questions. The rules have changed quietly over the decades. For much of American history, higher education was treated as shared infrastructure, like roads or clean water, something we invested in together because the benefits didn't stop at the individual. The question then isn't whether colleges are a scam or is even worth it. The real question is, what do we believe that higher education is for? Because how we answer that question determines who pays, who benefits, and who gets left behind. Is it a private investment where risk and reward belong to the individual? Or is it still a public good, one that strengthens democracy, economic stability, and social mobility for all? And with that being said, we've come to the end of the video. But this conversation still isn't over. I want to hear from you all. Do you see college as a public responsibility or a private transaction? And what would it take to move closer to a system that we all believe in? As always, thank you for staying till the end. If you haven't done so yet, make sure to subscribe and like this video. I'll see you all next week.